Alright, hey everybody, it's me and Buster Green, and I wasn't planning on doing this, but enough people complained and requested it that I'm caving in. Here are my reviews for the second batch of the Disney Plus new Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man show. Overall, I guess the show has been very, very mid, wobbling between the extreme possibility and the potential of being awesome, and the potential of being very lame. It's not the best Spider-Man show, but I'd say it's better than the last two Spider-Man shows, so because of that, and because it keeps tying tangentially into the MCU, I keep watching it. Now, quick recap on the first two episodes. The first episode came out swinging, but had a lot of convoluted plot lines and a lot of bad editings, which gave me some very mixed feelings on it. We got Nico Minoru filling in for MJ. She got a very messy intro I didn't like, but on the other hand, Venom appeared, and it was this crazy new Venom alien that I've never seen before. That was kind of cool. Then, meanwhile, probably the biggest sin of episode 1 is that they skipped over Spider-Man's first 6 months of being Spider-Man. Now, on the one hand, the MCU did the same shit, but the MCU did it because it was a goddamn Captain America movie with 12 other superheroes going on in it. There are some vague allusions to those first 6 months in the opening credits, and Disney, going purposefully out of their way to spite and annoy me, has announced that the first 6 months of Spider-Man are exclusively told in this expensive Spider-Man companion book that you can buy for money. Anyway, Spider-Man got down to some shenanigans, saved Harry Osborn, bricked a kid, and got recruited by Norman Osborn, the world's most honest man, of course. Also, a significant part of this episode was focused on Lonnie Lincoln, who is seemingly being set up as Peter's maybe arch nemesis in the show, and if he isn't, then the show is just awarding this fine young man far too much screen time. It feels like the directors of the show are way more interested in telling a story about Lonnie's downfall than they are telling a story about Peter's, rise to greatness. Now, I'm going to rank the first episode a 4 out of 10 because it was just too overstuffed with too much plot shit, and it didn't go over enough of the important details that I was really hoping to get from this show. One thing I will defend, though, from the first episode that a lot of people are having issues is that Peter uses a nitrogen tank to make his webs. Look, I don't know what your problem is with the tank, but I love the tank. I think that's very cool. I think it's very low tech. I think it makes sense that he needs a way to rapidly harden the webs, and I think that's one of the coolest things they added, just because it's different, but it's fun. Now, episode 2 was a much better paced episode where Spider-Man began his Osborn internship and was instantly hated by all the other elite and classist interns. Then he had it out with an F-rank villain named Butane, who was very MCU reimagined to be very similar to the MCU Shocker. He was just like a fire element Shocker. And then it ended on the great MCU style twist of holy fuck, Norman found out Peter's Spider-Man instantly. Now, this episode kind of restored my faith in the series because it focused on Peter, it had a good Peter versus good villain story, and I'm going to rate this one a pretty hot 9 out of 10 because it did pretty much everything right. Okay, so that brings us to the next batch of episodes, 3, 4, and 5. Also, I have no idea why Disney is releasing these things in 90-minute batches. I kind of love that because it's fun to binge, but it's unusual, but overall I like it. Alright, so episode 3 was titled Secret Identity Crisis, loosely based on a comic storyline called Identity Crisis that I think happened in the 90s, where Spider-Man had a bunch of weird alter egos for a little bit, and then if I remember the story correctly, later other people took over those alter egos and just became permanent characters that Spider-Man had to live with and didn't like. I'm not sure if I'm good with this episode referencing that storyline in a way that completely does a disservice to it. And it feels like they just include the costumes here as fan service without actually justifying it well enough. Oh, wait, actually, the secret identity shit happens in episode 4. Why is that the title of episode 3? That's actually some weird inconsistency. Did they mix up the titles? Anyway, so the story in episode 3 is Norman has figured out Spider-Man is Peter, so he gets instantly weird about it. Peter, meanwhile, is stressing out over it, and he visits Nico, but he can't tell her the truth, and then he has dinner with Osborn. So this is the first time Osborn's getting a real good, juicy chunk of screen time up to now. Now that I really get to sink into his performance, he sounds a lot more normal than I thought before, because before he only had one line in each episode. I'm also seeing Coleman Domingo get more into the role, and it might just be my imagination, but I think Coleman Domingo here is doing an impression of Willem Dafoe for this character, because there's a kind of weird vocal tick Willem Dafoe has where he makes a lot of noises, and I notice Coleman is sort of doing that, which is cool. Anyway, so Norman confesses at dinner that Spider-Man saved Harry, and then Norman became completely obsessed with him and wanted to fund him, and that comes off as kind of shady and weird. I kind of can feel where this is coming from because there's always been this like crazy weird obsession dynamic between Norman and Peter in media where sometimes Norman obsesses over Peter more than he does his own son Harry, but because Peter is smarter than Harry and like Norman always wanted a smart son. But in this universe, I can't quite pin it down what's going on. It's like he's basically become Spider-Man's boss and Peter's just going along with it without really like anything good to justify it. Now, Peter does mention that he's mostly working for Osborn for the money, but there's this like dark level insidiousness here that I can't like put a finger on, where it's like Peter is taking Norman's money to both keep Norman happy and in many cases to spend time with him, and that's sort of a vice versa both ways. But I don't know, there's like this weird imbalance in the power dynamic. And also, then Norman brings up that he like stalked 4 random teenagers just because he speculated they might know Spider-Man. Like, that's sus as hell. That's like some creepy ass pedophile shit right there. Now, I guess one major thing that I'm wondering about in the show, if Norman is already the Green Goblin or not. If he is the Green Goblin, then yeah, he's fucking crazy and that justifies his batshit insane behavior. But if he's not, well then, I look forward to the very fun spiral of craziness that the show will eventually get into. Now, anyway, then the villains of this episode are some real loser characters, some like below F-rank characters, Speed Demon and Tarantula. Is Tarantula a good guy? I don't know. Anyway, they get their powers from like a robot dumpster. What? And anyway, then one of the good things in this episode is Aunt May brings up Uncle Ben and they actually talk about it, and that's kind of huge. So it seems like based on the dialogue we have here, they confirm that MCU Uncle Ben exists, but he seemingly died of a peaceful or at least unrelated to Peter's circumstance before Peter became Spider-Man, and that's a big difference. Now, it's possible that that is a misdirect and we might have still gotten the typical origin, but I really don't think so because there were no signs of Ben in the first episode where Peter got his powers, and then May also implies that Ben's death made May and Peter have to move into a smaller apartment. So that all tracks because in the first episode, they were still like moving into that apartment. Then we get the Lonnie show again for a while, and Lonnie Lincoln fully gets traded to the 110th Street Gang for his dumb brother who ruined his life. The 110th Street Gang seems to be a reference to the movie Across 110th Street starring Yaphet Kotto, which has a hard as fuck theme song. Like, that's a great theme song. So then in the end of the episode, Spider-Man beats up Tarantula and Speed Demon, and Norman helps tell him that if they like hug each other, they'll die. I thought they were gonna explode, but they don't. They just like get shoved into a wall really fast, whatever. And this is the last time Spider-Man uses the Nitrogen Tank hockey jersey outfit. Rest in peace, Nitrogen Tank. I was the only person who appreciated you. All right, so this episode was pretty good. Not as good as the others. I'm going to rank this one as 6 out of 10. The best things here were Norman getting into being a creeper, Uncle Ben, all that lore there, and the villains in this episode were kind of shit. Despite the fact they are established comic book villains, they're like so low on the totem pole that I don't care. I did feel really bad for the Lonnie storyline this episode. All right, let's move on to episode 4. Episode 4, Parker continues to be a major failure, but keeps being propped up by Norman. His boss teacher guy at Oscorp is meanwhile majorly pissed at him for like all the special treatment. This guy's got to turn to a villain and fight Peter. They're like building up the hate there too much. Anyway, Peter and Harry meanwhile start to become friends, and Norman also reveals that his office has this like super sinister lockdown mode. Like that's some super villain shit right there. That's definitely going to be used for like some gross murder stuff later. Also, I'm having a flashback. Didn't Matt Lauer have an office like this for like some creepy sex stuff? Anyway, big fascinating reveal this episode is that Captain America's Civil War is happening at the exact same time of this episode, and Peter is completely not involved in this universe. This is an MCU adjacent universe where Peter just never became friends with Iron Man, which has some crazy fascinating implications if they keep playing this show up to Thanos and the Snap. Now, I'm assuming if they do the Snap, Peter and May would still get snapped out of existence and suffer that 5-year loss. But I don't know, I'm going to bet now that the show will probably just never deal with Thanos and the Snap because it was already too awkward in the movies. But if they did deal with it, that would be freaking cool as hell. Anyway, Norman also mentions that Age of Ultron happened to set up the Sokovia Accord. So I feel like this episode is like the biggest episode that's trying to remind people that this is all set in the MCU, but not the MCU. There's also like the pictures of Norman and like King T'Chaka in this episode. And I guess like, yeah, if this is taking place at the exact same time as Civil War, then the next movies in the MCU canon would be Doctor Strange, Black Panther, Thor Ragnarok, Ant-Man 2, and then finally Infinity War, where Thanos fucks up the entire world. So technically, this also means the show is taking place 9 years ago in 2016. Note all these weird, funky 2016 fashions. Anyway, Norman gets creepy and possessive of Peter in this episode, while not really listening to Peter at all again. And yeah, Norman is kind of creeping me out. It really feels like, for me, Norman like essentially purchased Peter, like he paid him off, and Norman is treating Peter as like this thing that he owns. And Peter is too young, too nice, too dumb to really process like the sinister implications of it. Peter gets the Prodigy suit from Norman, instantly has a cape accident. Then he gets the Bugman suit, but he can't control the backpack. And then lastly, he gets like the black suit that like just scares children. So yeah, once again, why wasn't this episode named Secret Identity Crisis? Because this is like the one that's actually tangentially dealing with the Identity Crisis storyline. Meanwhile, Lonnie is like trying to be a good kid despite being sunk into this gang, and he's just freaking doomed, man. It's a sad doom story of how this like once promising kid is going to fuck up everything. He also gets sent on this semi-suicidal taco run to like this gang-owned taco shop, seemingly just so he can get like frightened of like the enemy gang, and maybe the gang leader was trying to like fuck him over. Anyway, yeah, he's just getting used to gang violence here, and like I guess that's a wake-up call for him. Meanwhile, Norman eventually finally gives Peter a suit that resembles the Future Foundation suit from the comics, and I thought that was pretty cool. So then this episode ends on this weird bank robbery by this random group of European criminals who all seem destined to become hardcore Spider-Man villains. One is clearly the Rhino, note the ugly Rhino face. The other is clearly the Chameleon. I had to look that one up, but yeah, now I notice he's got the gloves. There's this female criminal. I had no idea who she was. Apparently she's this obscure Iron Man villain named the Unicorn. Okay. And the last girl here, I have no idea who she's going to be, but she's got to be someone. She looks way too over-designed. I don't know who the fuck she is. Maybe she's Pris from Blade Runner. If you know who she is, leave a comment. Anyway, they all get stopped except for the Unicorn, who gets away. And then at the end of the episode, she gets over to Doc Ock, who gives her powers. Oh, and at another end of the episode twist, Peter also accidentally exposes his secret identity to Harry. So this episode, hard to judge. I'd say it's a step down from the last one, aside from like all the lore dumps with the juicy, nerdy MCU shit. It's a pretty bland filler episode overall. There's some big twists with Harry and the Doc Ock reveal, but yeah, I'm gonna rank this one 5 out of 10 because it just felt too much like a filler episode. It felt too much like this was just like a bunch of jokes about the other Spider-Man costumes and then like everyone moving from where they're at point A to where they're at point B. I didn't love how much time was wasted on just like the dumb gags, because for me, they weren't funny. And that brings us to the last episode of the second batch, Unicorn Unleashed. So this starts with a big, great scene that reveals the show's Doc Ock, and in a really pleasant surprise, it's basically comic accurate 90s Doc Ock with a couple of minor differences. Now, I can't put my finger on it, but instead of sounding like Dr. Frankenstein, he sounds like kind of like that Weasley guy from Lost. He's got like big sociopath energy, and he's very, very much up to something. He's obviously going to try to take over the city, but I don't think he's there yet. Either way, this show's Doc Ock made me super happy because up to now, almost every character who's shown up on this show has been compromised in some way or changed based on like their MCU counterpart. And seeing super comic accurate Doc Ock show up with zero changes or adjustments honestly makes me super pleased and kind of like optimistic that the show might go off like in a really good direction again. Anyway, meanwhile, Norman gets busy, so he puts Ned in charge of Spider-Man. Oh wait, I don't mean Ned, I mean Harry, because in this universe, Ned is Harry or Harry is Ned. Either way, Harry is the guy in the chair, which was what Ned was in the MCU movies, and it's weird. Spider-Man eventually fights the unicorn person and almost loses, but manages to get lucky that the Rhino gets pissed off with her and switches sides when the unicorn was about to kill him just for fun. Meanwhile, Nico and Peter go to the movies and they're definitely on a date, but then Peter ruins it by inviting Harry on the date. And Nico has this like, but I wanted a date moment. And wow, they really did swap out Nico 1-for-1 for MJ. I'm really surprised, but I guess I'm surprised in a good way. I feel like a lot of people are going to hate that they're kind of trying to ship Peter with this character who a lot of people consider a lesbian, but like in the comic canon, she's officially bisexual, so this isn't out of the ordinary, but I just know a lot of people who like headship this canon as a lesbian might have issues with that. Overall, though, I'm down for Peter and Nico having a relationship if the show is absolutely against pulling out MJ and Gwen at this point. I feel like the show is going to be a little bit malicious about it, though, and like maybe they're just gonna put Peter and Nico through some shit. I really don't think the show is handling Peter's romantic life well, and I kind of think it's just kind of like trying to torture the characters. Lastly, there's this huge gang fight between the 110th Street Gang and the Scorpion Gang. The Scorpion Gang is kind of funny because ironically, they're almost completely made up of various different people who have all had the Scorpion identity in the comic, and their positions in the gang are almost seemingly references to how popular they overall were when they were Scorpion. Like, Lonnie ends up getting knifed by the Mac Gargan Scorpion, and there's this girl here who was like the female Scorpion. And then after Lonnie gets knifed, the gang like celebrates him and renames him Tombstone. Also, what the fuck? They bandaged his jacket and not his arm? That's not how bandages work, you fucking idiots. He's gonna bleed out. God damn it, you dumb gangsters don't even know the first thing about healthcare? Ugh. Anyway. Okay, so this episode, I guess we're back to 6 out of 10, and I'm mostly giving the show that for the Doc Ock reveal and the Nico drama, which was fun. Overall, the battle here, once again, was kind of lame. I didn't fully love it that Spider-Man got his ass kicked by an Iron Man villain, and then the Rhino saved the day. What the hell is that? The Lonnie versus Scorpion fight was also kind of annoying. I mean, I liked it, but the Lonnie storyline is still moving at a snail's pace for me. Like, at this point, just push the kid into a vat of acid already. I get where it's going. I get that he's becoming an unredeemable monster because forces of nature against his control are pushing him to become a criminal, and he just didn't fight against them at all to ever, like, stop that, like, chain of decay. Anyway, all right, so here's where we're at judging all the episodes. I guess overall, most of them are coming out a little bit mid, but a little bit positive with potential to do better. Episode 2 is still the best episode in my opinion, just because they actually put some like effort into developing Butane as a villain. I feel like with all these other episodes, they're not focusing enough time on the villains because I think the show is giving too much screen time to Lonnie to set up Lonnie's long-term downfall. I don't really think there's a fix for that, but I hope that once Lonnie eventually becomes Tombstone, they cut that shit out and they just give a more balance of screen time to Peter and the villains. I think that's the biggest problem with the show right now. I feel like even though I like Lonnie's story, I think it's taking too much time away from Peter and developing the other villains. Like, really, if I'm being real right now, the overall Peter drama is kind of falling flat for me because it feels like they're just not focusing on Peter. It feels like the showrunners here are more interested in telling a wacky story about Lonnie's downfall to becoming a criminal than they're focused on talking about Peter and Spider-Man drama. Like, if I'm being real, like, in these first 5 episodes, there's not enough Spider-Man in a show called Spider-Man, and that's kind of an unforgivable sin. I guess I can forgive it if it eventually climaxes in some wild manipulation twist or, like, some kind of craziness that has a decent payoff. But yeah, hopefully once Lonnie becomes Tombstone and they stop giving Tombstone half the show will be balanced better. But that's kind of one of my issues I have. Even though I enjoy the Lonnie storyline, I really don't like the way they're giving him so much screen time in every episode that it's compromising Peter and the villains' screen time. Like, I don't know if there's any way to fix that. Maybe they could have just done like an all Lonnie episode. But for right now, it's off to me and I don't like it. All right, that's where I'm at with it, you guys. I still overall am enjoying the show, and I'm very psyched to see what happens. So far, my favorite character on the show is just Doc Ock, because that's uncompromised comic book Doc Ock. Yeah, okay. Leave a comment, let me know what you guys are thinking, and I'll join you guys when the next batch is out. All right, thanks. Good night.